And so please put questions in the chat and we'll get to those questions and so then we're going to move to some breakout sessions and then we'll get together at the end and we'll be done right on time at 12:30. So that's kind of the process we're going to go through for our fireside chat. So first of all, Marcy, thank you so much for showing up. And I spent some time last night looking at your body of work over the last 20 years. We won't go from when you were a corporate lawyer, but we'll go for the last 20 years when you've been in the longevity space. And you've kind of gone through a few different phases from what I could tell. You
Mhm,
started off writing a book about slashers,
mhm.
which is not a crime series, it's actually something else. So maybe learn a little bit more about how you went from the slasher movement to Encore Careers, and now your work is around co-generational collaboration. So maybe you could just kind of take us to the last 20 years in 5 minutes to give us some background on what you do and how you got there.
Thanks, Tom and Colleen, for this like warm welcome. And I'm glad we have an intimate group. We can have this be like an open conversation. I love to do things really informally. Um, and I like the way you capsulize. That is my journey, Tom. You like named how I see the body of work that I've been steeped in. And I got really interested in the arc of a career and a life course because I went through a career change that felt kind of big to me at the time, but now just seems so standard. After 9 years as a lawyer, I felt really disillusioned and I was in the wrong field. And I figured out how to reinvent myself, which I did, through the usual methods. I found mentors, I worked with a coach, I took a lot of classes. And I live in a city, like many of you do, and it was just easy to find resources to help me do this. And what I ended up wanting to do was become a freelance writer and journalist. And I didn't go back and get a master's degree. I found mentors and figured out how to do that. And I started pitching stories to different publications and freelancing. And I ended up really drawn to the workplace beat because I was going through this existential, what should I do with my life? Feeling, and I realized that so many people around me were dealing with the same thing. So I became very interested in how the world of work was shifting, and we had to constantly shift to keep up with it and to stay in tune with who we are and what we wanted to do. So I was writing at that time for the New York Times, and that is the place that I most frequently was writing for. And I wrote this one story about people who had multiple professional identities at the same time. And I called these people slashes because they defined themselves through the use of the slash. And I had written about this woman I knew who was a corporate lawyer and a Baptist minister. And I wrote this story about her and this other guy, two people. He was one guy was a high school English teacher and a fashion model. Like, and very these people were like height of their top of their game in the many things that they did. And this story, this was before social media, but that story went viral, and I got a lot of people emailing me saying, "I live like this. I have many slashes. Why don't you talk to me?" And I was like, "Oh, I think there's a book here." So I wrote this book called One Person Slash Multiple Careers, which really explored like what it is to kind of mine our various identities and build a portfolio kind of life that allows you to not just stay on one path. And that book got me a column and a blog at the New York Times. And then I stayed doing that work for about 10 years, where I was writing about the future of work and careers and reinvention. And it was through that position that I started hearing about this other interesting body of work being done by a little think tank in San Francisco that was called Encore.org,
Hmm.
started by Mark Friedman, who many of you may have heard of. He is the person who has influenced my career more than anyone. And Mark had written four books about the reinvention of retirement, the invention and reinvention, like what was going on with longer working lives and longevity, the intersection of like longevity with craving later life purpose. And I got really interested in these ideas. And Mark was really one of the first thinkers to be talking about what was going to happen as more and more aging baby boomers were going to be working longer, seeking longer purpose, trying to figure out what to do with the years that we all are inhabiting right now. And So I wrote a bunch of stories about the work that was being done by Mark and the early Encore movement. And I got so enamored of that work and I started, Mark became my favorite source. I was using him all the time in my work. And he invited me to come speak at a national conference. The Encore used to host these big conferences every 2 years. So Encore movement conferences for leaders who were running organizations like What's Next 50, but this was 15 years ago. And I was all ready to go to one of those conferences, and the New York Times ended my column and blog because it was 2008 and the media, it was the beginning of the recession and the media was laying off people left and right. And I had this like big contract and I was doing this work that I loved. And so I wrote about it for the New York Times. I wrote this column about what it means when you're a workplace writer who gets sacked. And Mark Friedman called me right after I wrote that column. And he said, well, great news. You lost this position, which means now we can pay you to come speak at our conference because I wouldn't
Oh,
accept payment because it would have been a conflict of interest because I had written about Mark and Encore for the New York Times. So I went to that conference and then Mark offered me a job. And that's how I ended up moving to this nonprofit where I have been for the last 15 years. So I joined this organization that used to be called Encore.org to build out the Encore Careers movement. So I wrote a book on Encore Careers. And in that period, we were working with organizations all over the country, the US, maybe a few in Canada too, actually, but
mm,
mostly in the US, higher ed organizations that were trying to create more pathways for people who are in this life stage and community organizations. So we worked with the leaders who were trying to architect what do we need for this new stage of life. And then we also did major storytelling and prize campaigns like the Purpose Prize, which honored social entrepreneurs over the age of 60. We gave out something like $10 million over a 10,
wow.
10-year period to social innovators over the age of 60 to create a new story of purpose in later life and to a new story around who are the innovators. Like, and it's not just young people who are innovating, but it is also people in this stage of life. And ARP took over that program and many other programs that we have created at Encore. And I can pause there. I can tell you how we got to the next chapter, but
Yeah, no, that's a really good background. And so tell us then maybe a little bit more about the work you do with CoGenerate.
yeah,
And that's a great background though. That really is
yeah.
helpful. Um,
So,
it's amazing
so
how getting fired can open up doors, isn't it? You
completely,
know?
completely. We all
It,
say, like, I think we have to embrace these moments of vulnerability that
yeah.
really often kind of set us up for the next thing. And so I joined this group. We are a small nonprofit, loosely based in San Francisco, but we are now completely virtual. And we have a small team that's distributed all over the US. And we also work with partners, fellows, and others um, kind of all over the US, including a very close colleague in Canada. You might know Simon Chan,
Mhm.
who's doing quite a lot in this space. Um, and what happened to the years, we did a lot of work to try to normalize these mid and later life shifts to purpose oriented work. And our most well known program in that area is called Encore Fellowships. And we created this year-long fellowships for people who wanted to move specifically from the private sector to the social sector. So you've had a successful career in the business world and you want to give back. And many people were wanting to do that, but needing a pathway. Like for young people who want to do public service, there's all these fellowships and
Yeah.
opportunities. And we're like, where are the middle aged programs? So we created that program and we placed about 2,000 people in nonprofit organizations to do meaningful kind of uh, using their like management skills from the private sector. And that program also still exists. It's now run by the FedCap agency.
I
And
gotta ask you a
so,
question. So as
yeah,
you talk about
yeah,
this, I'm getting visions of the intern, the movie.
yeah, yeah.
Is that kind of how we should be thinking about
Yeah,
that?
but not in the tech space in the nonprofit
Yeah,
sector.
yeah.
So
It's
the
not good. You're not
fellows
sending
we
people to
placed,
Google.
yeah, yeah, we were sending people who want to solve social problems in their communities and want to kind of have that kind of meaningful chapter of work, but who had all these skills that were not being tapped. So
Wow.
So, because we are ever mindful of demographics, and if you'd say the Encore body of work is supported by the demographic that, thousands of people turning 60 every day seeking purpose, well, another demographic shift is upon us, which is we are now this increasingly age diverse world where we have, for the first time ever, equal distribution of people at every age from about
Hmm.
7 to 70. And what that means is that we need to create a society that works for people of all ages. And we are not really equipped to do that. In fact, we have a society that's set up in very siloed ways. And we're in a siloed space right now of people in middle age, right? Trying to
Yeah.
figure out middle age. And what we have is this society where young people are in school and middle people are in the workplace, and older people are often self segregating in 55 plus communities and in independent living places. And what that means is we used to be very integrated where people lived in village lives and civic institutions and faith communities were thriving centers of intergenerational activity. People lived near their families. Now people often live separate from their families, often in other cities and geographies.
Mhm.
So what we decided to do is we had been known as this older change maker community and hub, and we decided to reimagine ourselves as the place for older and younger change makers who wanted a partner to create a better world. So about 5 years ago, we rebranded. We changed our name from Encore to CoGenerate. So we made up a new word that we hope will catch hold in the
Yeah.
world. And we renamed ourselves. We also named co-CEOs. So Mark Friedman is still our CEO, but we now have a second CEO, Eunice Lynn Nichols, who's about 25 years younger than Mark and had run all of our programs for many, many years. And they are a co-leadership team who are trying to model a new kind of leadership across generations, which we hope will allow us to leverage their different perspectives, their different networks, and perhaps speak to people of different ages and stages. And now we run all kinds of programs for leaders who are working on cross generational collaboration projects. And I can tell you more about what that looks like, but that
Yeah.
is the core of
That's
our
what you
work
do.
right now. Yeah.
Okay. One of the things that we've all been taught that diverse teams are stronger, right?
Hmm.
And when you think about ways that you create diversity, I think a lot of focus is around maybe gender diversity, ethnic diversity, cultural diversity. What are some of the benefits you get from age diversity or generational
Hmm.
diversity
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
you don't get from some of these other things?
Yeah. And I think some things are unique in the mixed age context, and some things are the same kinds of things we get from other kinds of diversity.
Okay.
So, what's unique about age diversity is that we're all wired to know how to partner with people or deal with people who are older and younger than us. We all come from families, right? Which is the place you learn about how to deal with older people and younger people for ill and for harm, right? We learn how to have conflict and we learn how to have joy. Um, and so we're built in. We have I'm sorry, we have this innate kind of skill set that we can turn on and practice it in other places. And you may not have that with other kinds of groups who are more foreign to you. So we are hardwired to behave in this way. Um, we also have different kinds of intelligences that live within older and younger people. So I don't know if you've heard about this concept of fluid and crystallized
Mm-mm.
intelligences. So
No.
fluid intelligence is what young people have. You pick up things quickly. It's why we always say young people can learn languages so quickly. Young people can like absorb all these new ideas. But older people have something that's called crystallized intelligence, which is this ability to connect threads and to see patterns and things that come with years of living. And if you have a team or a partnership or a collaboration where you have both kinds of intelligences, you're obviously set up better to succeed than if you had a team that was heavy on just one or the other. So that is kind of one way in which um, there are kind of obvious, like other patterns, like having older people on the team. You have institutional history. You have people who
Yeah.
lived through business cycles, who've seen that thing before, right? You've seen it happen. Um, and younger people are swimming in different waters. They are seeing new trends. And you have access to different networks if you have older and younger people working on projects together. And it's loose ties and new networks that help us spread ideas, that help us find good talent, that help us resonate with different audiences. So if you are in any kind of business or social movement and you want to reach beyond your age band, you need people who can speak the language of your audience, who can
Mhm.
and decode things, and who don't have blind spots. So there are endless reasons
Yeah,
I
no,
could go on
those
and
are some
on.
good
Yeah,
examples. Those are
yeah.
super. So one of the things I would imagine in this work is you start working with older, more senior people, and they're like, "Oh, I'm here, and I'm going to share my wisdom."
Mm,
And I wonder, whenever I hear that, I kind of recoil from that. I'm like, we're not, even though we're 60, we're not that smart. I don't know,
mm.
but is that one of the things that you have to retrain people?
Completely. Yeah, completely. I think when we work with mixed age groups, which
Yeah.
I'm working on a fellowship right now where I'm reviewing applications literally, and it's a mixed age fellowship. And so there will be teenagers and people over 60 in the same cohort. And it's a cohort about public voice in civic spaces. So we're trying to create a mixed group of leaders who want to use their public voice on the power of cogeneration in our civic life. And in the older people, we often screen for humility.
Mm.
We're not likely to choose people who come in the room thinking they have all the answers. We want people with curiosity and with humbleness, and that's what we've screened for in all the years of doing the Encore Fellowship. We want people who are like, yeah, I maybe have done something for 30 years, but I'm here to learn and I'm here to take what I know and also at the same time show my curiosity, show that I'm open to learning how the world is changing and I want to stay relevant and I want to kind of learn how things are done. Um, and so I think it is a combination of how do you have the confidence to know what you know and
Yeah.
to impart it where it's useful, but also the humility to know when it's also time to be learning.
Got it. No, that's really helpful. I mean, that piece of always being that learning mindset, it makes a lot of sense. I just
Someone
saw
asked a
that.
good question
Yeah,
about
yeah, yeah.
AI.
I just saw
Yeah,
that come through. So you're doing my job for me, Marcy. I appreciate that.
I'm a multitasker. Yeah,
I love
I,
it.
I think
Well,
AI is a
yeah.
huge, interesting
Can we
opportunity
just
now.
state the question?
Oh,
Peter
yeah.
just asked, how does the introduction of AI, which seems to excel at fluid knowledge, change the equation in mixed age groups, especially in the work environment? So thanks.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Marcy.
I think we have a really interesting moment where um, you know, people who've been around for a while have seen many technologies have to be incorporated into how we work. I think I remember the day I got my first email address and started working on the internet. I don't know if other people have that same memory.
Yeah.
Um, this is the same kind of revolution, right? It's going to change everything about the way we work. So I think many of us are like, yes, we understand that there's a new tool that's going to be transformative and we're ready to kind of take it on and figure out how to learn, but we're going to be working alongside a group of people who have never known another way. And I think that's a really fascinating juxtaposition. I have been talking to some teenagers recently who are really involved in using their voice at how we need to involve young people in the policies we shape around AI because they are going to be affected by this thing that they did not help to create, that is now the water that they swim in. And I think it's really important to make sure that young voices are at the table as we think about safety protocols, as we think about all the things that were messed up in the social media era. So I think it's a really important time to have cross generational collaboration on where we're going with AI. And I think it's really important to learn about AI in mixed age settings, not just and I
Mm,
know in our space, we're going to see a lot of like AI for the 50 plus like, I would encourage people to like do your AI learning in a mixed age space so that you're not siloed and just processing along with age peers.
that's interesting. That's helpful, and it makes a lot of sense. It's interesting because I have two 20-year-old daughters, and their
Mm.
point of view on AI is so different from mine.
Well, how
Um,
so?
They think it's all slop, and
Mm,
I think it's like the best thing I've ever seen.
mm,
But it really makes me rethink about it. And one of them is
mm,
actually a machine learning engineer, so she kind of knows
mm.
this stuff. And um, and so it is interesting how they in some ways they're more skeptical, which makes me think about it differently.
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah,
fantastic.
yeah. Um, I was gonna ask about um, you know, it's if you were to say, I have to build a relationship. I'm just looking at my screen with Mark here. I'd be like, I have a lot in common with Mark. I'm similar age. I kind of know how to approach this. Um, but in some ways, it's kind of intimidating to try to build a relationship with somebody that's in a different age cohort.
It
Um,
sure is. Yeah.
and what are some of the things you do to help people work through that? Because you're like, well, they don't want to hang out with an old person,
Mm,
you
hmm
know?
hmm
They don't want to hang out with some guy that's their dad's age or whatever. How do you help people think through that and to build a meaningful relationship?
I'm going to answer that like organizationally because we work with so many leaders who are like running cross age kind of programs, and then personally because I have
Okay.
like a personal obsession with older and younger friendships.
Yeah.
And the kind of organizational um, route is I think the most effective way to form relationships across age is to go out and do something together around a
Mm.
common interest or passion. I hear of people like who
Well,
meet
no
older and
fucking
younger.
kidding.
Ooh, where'd that come from? Um,
Yeah.
so people who get involved in political campaigns, classic example of like young people, like people who get involved in any kind of volunteer work or activism. It's just really easy to work on something together. And then everybody says, and then the age is stripped away. Like you're there because you have a common passion, a common issue. That could be an art class, a pickleball, like it could be in anything, hiking groups, cycling groups,
Yeah.
whatever your passion is. Um, I host a clothing swap with my mom, who's 85, and I'm 60. So it's an intergenerational clothing swap. We also have like a bunch of all my mentees come and they bring their friends, and I'm constantly collecting like college students in my neighborhood, and I tell them to come. And um, and that is an area we're all like into clothes. So we like have this thing we're doing. And meanwhile, we're helping, we're trying to set people up on dates and we're helping people who need to find jobs. And suddenly it's like a women's circle that is, and I've seen that happen around crafts, around sports, around,
Hmm.
activism, all kind of common ways. And so the people that we are supporting, the leaders who are bringing people together, they're usually working on something. They're working on a voter registration drive. They're working on solving, food insecurity in their neighborhood. They're doing stuff. And suddenly that person isn't like you feel like your mom. That person feels like the person who's working on this project with you.
Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, cool. So shout out to the group. Please put questions you have into the chat because in a few minutes I'm going to run out of questions. So so feel free to do that. Um, I where can you just talk a little bit more about like successes you've seen in actually creating those intergenerational relationships, just so we kind of because that's one of the
Yeah.
things I think it's like where do you start?
Yeah.
That would be
Do you mean
helpful.
on a personal level?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, personal. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I just think of so many of the friendships that I've developed. Like I run a group now of 10 of us. We all have no kids. We call ourselves the no kidders, and we are age diverse. The youngest was 29 when we started, and she doesn't want to have kids, and the oldest is like 84. And we are very diverse, coupled, single, gay, straight,
Mhm.
various ages, various races and ethnicities, types of career paths. And this identity has brought us together. So I've written some articles about not what does it feel like to age without children and like to try to have legacy and purpose when you don't have children.
Yeah.
And some people have like responded to that work, and that's like one of the ways that I so often a friend will be like, I have a friend who's wrestling with whether to have kids. Can I introduce you? And like suddenly I'm having this very intimate conversation with a stranger around something that is very core to both of our identity. I've seen that happen so much in like the LGBT community, for example, where people connect across age because they need a mentor that's not their parent, that's someone who has walked their path before. I've seen it happen in veterans groups. And my husband is in like a prostate cancer support group. And in some ways, that's very peer to peer because of the age issue. But I think there are other health men's groups, for example, like where I think men connect across generations because they're involved in some kind of uh, group that is meant to be cross age. I see that happening in faith communities, for example, where you can get into a group that is intentionally intergenerational. So that is one
Hmm.
area. My mom is really into, well, so am I. What my mom and I are card players. We're both involved in
Oh,
poker, and like I now have like a very intergenerational poker game because it's like my mom's friends and my friends, and I have like this 30-year-old guy who's a really good poker player, and sometimes he brings in friends. So that is a way, and I'm like thinking about it, and now like now when I put a group together, I'm like, how can I get out of my own space, and who do I know who shares my passion, who might be able to refer somebody.
yeah. You're such a natural connector. It's kind of it really comes across. Um, Are
Mm.
there things that you should really avoid doing if you want to create this intergenerational relationships? Is there things you should turn off in your brain? Does
Yeah,
that
I
make
would
sense?
say two things.
Yeah.
Yes, on dog parks. Dogs are a huge corrector. I
Yeah.
think the main thing I would say is try to resist the impulse to give advice before you are asked. And I think those of us who've been around for a while, it's like really easy to fall into advice mode. And often people don't want advice. They just want friendship or they want to talk. And then you could practice like, what would you like right now? What are you looking for? Would it be helpful if I shared, if I reacted or gave it like, so I always ask permission before I'm going to do anything that feels like advice. Um, and I try to, the other thing I think is really important, and this is much more in terms of projects you're working on, whether it's a work project or a volunteer project, I would try to pay attention to where the power sits in any kind of group and see if you can disrupt that power. So here's an example. On a work team, where the most senior people are holding the power, and you have one of these like brainstorm meetings. My suggestion would be the people with the most power, which usually are the older people, should
Yeah.
sit back and not speak until everyone else has spoken. That takes a lot because you may be sitting there knowing you have this important thing to contribute. So a lot of what I'm
Yeah.
encouraging is like a little restraint.
Yeah, interesting. That's a good central theme is this, so constrain yourself. Um, Larry's asking if you can speak to the focus of CoGenerate now. What are
Hmm.
some of the programs, goals,
Yeah.
etc.? I think
So
it's
I would say the you could go to our website and like see all our work, and we run a lot of webinars, and there's lots of ways to plug in. Our biggest initiatives at the moment are one in higher ed. We're working with a lot of higher ed leaders to make campuses more age diverse, and in ways that really, like, what if you had designed campuses for 100-year lives and not just for 18 to 22-year-olds? What would campuses look like? So, right now, there are some Encore transition classes on campus, and they are quite siloed. So that means you go back, you could do an Osher lifelong learning project, or you take an Encore transition program, and it looks just like this. What's next? It's a bunch of people all in the same life stage, all learning with and from each other. But what if you got involved in campus and you were truly welcome anywhere? Or what if you moved into a university-based retirement community and you basically lived in either a dorm for people in our life stage or a mixed age setting where you were also living with college students and living with them and going to the gym with them, and and also taking classes or doing service projects. So we are working with a bunch of higher ed institutions that are really trying to be innovative and creative. And the truth is, it's in their economic interest to do so, because we're at a moment where there's something called the enrollment cliff, which is the 18 to 22-year-old population is in decline. And many campuses will not be able to survive if they don't have another source of
Hmm.
revenue. So there's incentive to higher ed institutions to cater to people like us. So you're going to see more of that. If you go to our website and look at the
Yeah.
campus work, I hope it will feel inspiring. So a lot of our work is like trying to work with innovators who are trying to build a different tomorrow. So it doesn't always exist. My mother's always like, I love this work. Where can I go near me? And I'm like, okay, I don't have all the answers just yet, but I can tell you who's innovating. And someone
Yeah.
asked about the work Simon in Canada is doing. And Simon is very involved in this higher ed work, and he is the co-lead of something called the Nexel Collaborative. In fact, that would be a very good, he'd be
Hmm.
a good speaker for your group. And Nexel is a collaborative of all the higher ed programs for people in our life stage. And there are many of them around around the US now. Maybe 15, 17 universities and higher ed institutions have these programs. Many of them are online now,
Hmm.
because so they're not just geographic based. But we are trying to encourage those programs to find more opportunity to bring the people who join those programs into some more intergenerational spaces.
I was talking to this lady about a month ago who she runs I think it's a program at University of Arizona where you can literally buy a condo there. They're not cheap, but you have access.
Was it Lindsay? You were talking to Lindsay?
I think so, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, at
yeah, yeah.
Stanford. And I was like, oh my God, I've never wanted to live in Arizona before, but that sounds like fun, And I think you're right. You had access to all the classes, all the amenities. It's like going to
Yeah.
university again.
Yeah,
That
that's called Mirabella. So, and
okay.
Karen, who introduced me here, hi Karen, um, also mentioned that at SUNY Purchase, near where Karen and I live in New York, there is a beautiful kind of community on the campus of SUNY Purchase, where you can
Mhm.
also live, take classes, get involved in intergenerational efforts. I think the one in Arizona, Mirabella, and the one in SUNY Purchase are the kind of gold standard of what that looks like. They're also quite expensive. One of the things we're trying to work on is how can we have more affordable versions of what those look like on different campuses? And there are many campuses now who are exploring, unfortunately, the campuses need to use their real estate to earn revenue. So that's why
Sure.
they contract with these senior living facilities. But many of them are trying to figure out how to make this more kind of mixed income rather than something that only a few people can afford.
Got it. Interesting. Um, I haven't done a good job of following the chat. Colleen, am I missing anything that um
I think we've got a fair number of comments as well,
okay.
around um, one of the things that I sort of was interested in, is that there's a lot of, we hear a lot about loneliness and feeling
Mm,
sidelined and that sort of
good
thing, right,
question.
in the community. And so, where's the practice for that most powerfully shifts people from feeling lonely and sidelined, right? And how can we even pilot, take it into our What's Next 50 community and pilot something in our own community?
Yeah, I mean, volunteering is one of the most effective ways to combat loneliness. And if you volunteer in ways that put you into an age diverse group, you will naturally make relationships across age. When I was in my 40s, I got really involved, and I was living as a writer and a journalist. I get really involved in a group here in New York called Girls Right Now. And I was craving, because I didn't have any children, I wanted to figure out like how was I ever gonna know young people in my city when I don't have any children? So I got involved as a mentor in this organization, which connected women writers with high school girls who had an inclination towards writing. And I met so many young women that are still in my life today, And that organization is very much about cross mentorship. I mean, the mentors out in the working world, like we were all like looking to the young women. It's like, how do we stay relevant? Like, what are you all reading and talking about? We immediately had things in common. It was super easy. And I was involved in that organization for a decade. And I really think it changed my life. It changed who I spend time with in my own city. So, volunteering is one of the easiest ways. We did a report a couple of years ago on cross-generational connection as the answer to one of the answers to the loneliness crisis. And we had two big conclusions. One is nobody is starting groups for lonely people. People are bringing people together to do a thing. And then the outcome is that everyone's less lonely. So
Mm.
I think that's the real magic here, is that if you find the thing that's interesting to you and you can find ways to do it that put you in a mixed age setting, you will have new connections, you will have new purpose, and therefore you will feel less isolated and more useful. And we all want to feel useful. The other thing we noticed is there are small local efforts everywhere. And so it's kind of let a thousand flowers bloom. We found that we learned the most from these like neighborhood based, people doing community gardens, cleanups, neighbor to neighbor storytelling events. There's one of my favorites in New York. Is one of our fellows started something called Stoop Stories, and it's in Brooklyn. They bring people together on stoops on the stairs outside of old houses where
Cool.
people talk in the neighborhood. And the young people moving into the neighborhood are learning about the neighborhood from elders who've lived there for generations. And they do videos of their storytelling work. But then they started like street game events, and they did these street games that I remember my father talking about playing stoop ball when he was young and stick ball. And they are
Mm-hmm.
bringing back these games that were played on the New York City streets. And now young people and elders in the neighborhood are, food is another thing that can bring people together like that. There are many areas where older people are passing on family recipes, and kind of younger people are really interested in learning in that environment. So it's all about like, what are your interests? And I
Yeah.
think if you start from your interests, it's much more organic.
It's interesting that um, I think a lot of times when you're in a very busy career for your entire life, and maybe I'm just sharing my personal feelings, you don't really have time for your interests. I mean, you
Mm,
literally, you're incented and rewarded to focusing on doing one thing really, really
yes,
well,
yes,
and
yes,
you finish that career, and then you're like, wait a second, this is hard. I gotta actually make this up.
yes.
Do you see that in your work where you actually have to kind of, you're not
Yeah.
only,
And I think you have to. So, this is the thing I encourage people to do. You got to show up for a bunch of different things and try things out and be willing to do the things you did when you were younger and you were trying to figure out who you are and what interests you. So, for me, I take classes. I'm like, nothing used to excite me more than like the adult education course catalog. And I'd be like, what do I get to take, this
yeah.
semester? And like, so I'll show you. I have something sitting right here. I took on a new hobby a few years ago because I was like, I don't have a hobby other than walking. I love to walk. And I took up paper marbling, and I took an art class. I had not taken it, and I now marble paper. So this is an example of like my new, I was
Oh,
never
beautiful.
into art. I was never into the arts. And I take all these classes now. I encouraged my teacher to run an advanced class, and now I go to her studio because I've taken all her basic classes, and she started a separate thing. I now digitize my prints and I make things, so I'm learning digital tools. So, I mean, my background of my phone is one of my marbling designs. I've
That's
learned
so
how to do
cool.
all this stuff on Canva. But my point is, like, I never thought this would be a thing that would interest me. I just happened to be, I was at I was leading a workshop at this, like a careers workshop at this spa resort. And I do this once a year. I was with my mom, and they have art classes there. And I stumbled into an art class on marbling. And then I was like, I got back to New York and I'm like, I have to learn more about this. And I sought out a teacher. And so it was something I was never interested in earlier in my life. And now it's like a fairly big obsession. So,
Yeah, it seems like an
um,
obsession,
yeah, it's a little
but
bit of
it
an
sounds like you just
obsession.
got to try some stuff and
Yeah, and you have to be willing to try stuff and say that wasn't for me.
yeah,
Um, yeah.
that's that's interesting.
Yes,
I mean,
I
and
love it.
I
I think
think that
that's,
advice about,
yeah.
that's what younger people are really good at, and they're
Mhm.
incented to do that, and then you got to retrain yourself. That makes a ton
Mm.
of sense.
Yeah,
Yes,
I
I mean,
feel
Um,
Amelia Urbara is one of my heroes. I love her work about experimenting. Yeah.
yeah, that's awesome. Colleen, should we go to breakouts or
we are ready.
okay, okay.
Do you want to
So
cover off the couple of questions?
yeah, so first of all, in all the breakouts, basically we would talk whatever we want to. We know that, but I think it'd be good if we could talk about how we might create more intergenerational connections that will help you personally find more purpose. And then what are some simple steps that you could do to start to get there? And I think Marci gave us a lot of good thought starters on that. So number one, how might you create more intergenerational connections? And then what are some simple things you might want to do or suggestions from the people in your breakout? Listen, listen to the group and would love to hear some of the things you talked about and some of the insights you might have gained from your discussion, listening to Marci as well as the discussion you had with your breakout group. So, does anybody want to volunteer? Um, Start out. Paul, you're always very uh, articulate, otherwise known as you're being voluntold.
Well, yeah, before I say anything, I threw a question in the chat. I'm very interested in the picture board in the background there that Marcy has, which I'm thinking, if each picture represented a group that she was part of, that would be that'd be quite something.
It's just a family and friend photo wall, and it's just punch pins, and I take the photos out and move them around all the time, and it's a collage. It's a living collage.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah, when people are coming over, I have to make sure they're represented on the wall.
Like,
I
where's
love that.
Waldo? Can you find that person? You have so many pictures.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I mean, and we had some interesting discussions in the group. And obviously in our group it was all males, and that point sort of came up at the very beginning of the sessions, um but yeah, I think the question really becomes, where do you start? And um and the point you were making, Marcy, about finding sort of a common interest, um and I think, beyond what might be sort of your professional or work experience and mentoring there. Yeah, I think for me it was sort of being able to sit back and reflect on, what are my interests, and what areas might I explore. So that's kind of where I was starting from.
Paul, you just gave me a memory too. I was thinking back when I graduated law school, I went on this trip that was sponsored by Georgetown University, and it was for alumni. But because it was an alumni trip, it was open to alumni of all ages. And I went with two friends who were recent graduates like me. And our favorite people on the trip were a bunch of friends over 50 who were traveling together. And we stayed in touch with these women after. And we were interested in the trip. That is what brought us together. And I think, Tom, when you were saying, you would know what to do if you were reaching out to someone your age. What is it like if you show up, when I'm in that art class, and I don't just think, oh, I'm going to find the person who feels like my age peer, but it's so easy. You're in an arts class, so you can just start chatting up a person whose work you're interested in.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you're talking to them and you are two artists in an art workshop. You are not, there's no barrier. And I think those are the kinds of ways to lower the friction. But the getting out of your comfort zone is to not look around the room and say, I'm going to zoom in on the person who seems just like me.
Yeah, that's really insightful. Um, any other topics that people discussed in the breakout that you'd like to share, or questions for Marci?
I think what we shared in our group was the fact that co-generational living has changed so much through generations, that I grew up with my grandfather being in the house with us all my life. He never moved in. It's very different now when parents are moving in, and it's a huge, huge disruption for both sides. It's a huge adjustment for both sides. And I think that when I grew up, as I say, I had my grandfather, it was normal to have somebody older in the house. You have a lot of people now leaving university, going to university in a different town, getting a job there, and they're not exposed to the intergenerational living like I was. So they don't get to spend a lot of time with a different age group. I think that is a big difference.
Oh, God. You finish your thought, Phyllis.
No, this is a totally different thought, because I have loads of them. Speaking when Tom was speaking about being so engrossed in work that when you leave, it's difficult to I was so engrossed in work that I didn't even know what I was interested in when I retired. And I was like totally at a loss until I discovered learning, which I just love. Anyway, I'll shut up because I don't want to dominate.
Well, Phyllis,
How did you discover learning, Phyllis? Tell us a little bit.
Do you want me to tell you the story of how I discovered learning? I'll be as brief as I can.
Yeah.
My nephew, whom I absolutely adore, posted on Facebook about, I grew up in Ireland, and it was University College Cork, later Life Learning, and two people who were interested in it. One of them had taken so many courses, he could have had his degree plus. The other one had taken like I think it was 24 courses that year. I was fascinated, looked into later life learning. And the fact that these two gentlemen, one was 86 and the other was 94, put me to shame, thinking, you need to get off your butt and do something. So every time I enroll in a class, I think, thank you, David, because you're the one who pushed me in that direction. So that's my story.
I'm hearing a real theme here about getting enrolled in classes, actually, as a great way to break out of patterns
I think living was an interesting thing. I just wanted that we didn't touch on that Phyllis mentioned. Phyllis, your observation that multi-generational living was a norm in your culture and how you were raised. So in the US right now, in immigrant communities, there is still a norm of intergenerational living. It is just not the norm in like assimilated American culture where people do just what you said, Phyllis. They go away to university, they find a job, they live on their own. But I just put something we have been tracking a bunch of co-living that involves like empty nesters who have a spare room who want maybe a younger person to come live with them. Often it's a college or grad student. That is like the new kind of living with unrelated people. In my grandmother's day, we used to call it a boarder. My grandmother had a boarder. That was really common in like the war years as a way to earn extra income. But you think about it also as a way to stave off isolation. A lot of people feel the house is empty when their kids have gone off, and this is another way to. And so I don't know the name of the one in Toronto. There is something we also have Nesterly in the U.S., which is another very interesting cross-generational matching program for living. So I think that we're going to see more and more of that. And then there is also families where they are doing multi-generational living, whether it's with a tiny house on the property or an ADU, accessory dwelling unit, which is legal in some places, or in the house. And I think the modern version is maybe we don't have to live all on top of each other, but we can have someone on the property.
That's great. One of the things that I do a lot of mentoring of entrepreneurs, and this conversation has actually made me rethink about what my role is. And also, what I can get out of it. Because most of those entrepreneurs are 30 or, in their 20s and 30s. And it's really kind of made me think, well, maybe I can get more out of it than just helping them with their business, but actually, learn from them and yeah, and feel another a better level of purpose through a slightly different approach. So I feel like that's really been helpful.
Yeah,
Well, thank you.
I was going to say, sorry, Mark, I
Yeah,
just wanted
go ahead,
to
Peter.
add to Tom's point that we had a similar conversation in the all men group that I was into. That that we were talking about the fact that Michael was saying you go into mentoring and it's kind of a top down thing. You're
Yeah.
coming in, you're the expert, but the part of the thing is a mindset shift to say, okay, how open can I be? How curious am I about these people? And then,
Yeah.
5 meetings later they're mentoring you, right? In a sense, because and I think so much of this has to do with I don't remember who said it just now, but looking for Tom said, looking for the person who looks just like you. Don't do that, but keep yourself as open as possible. But sometimes there needs to be some structure at the very beginning of these things, whether it's a classroom setting or a mentoring setting, from what I'm hearing, and it's kind of inspiring me to think about this in a different way too. But then be as curious as you can without being judgmental, and then you'll find, whoa, that's actually really interesting.
Yeah, that's great. Any other thoughts folks had?
Well, my
Phyllis,
regards to Mark Friedman, Marci, but yes.
Phyllis also asked a really good question of the two of us around finding things that, were our passions. And that was, what did we love to do as kids when we didn't have careers and, kids and everything and all the worries that come along with them, and exploring some of the things that we did that we'd like to pick back up again. And I thought that was a really interesting way to start, is thinking about, and I, excuse me, I played piano until I was 18 or 19. My piano gathers dust in my home right now.
That's the
And
allergens.
yes, exactly. Excuse me. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really interesting how that you kind of think you got to change your mindset back to maybe 30 years ago or more. That's really inspiring. Well, good. Any other ideas or to share some of the things that were discussed in the breakouts?
Well, the
Is,
other thing sorry, go ahead.
no, I
Sounds
was
like
gonna
you and
say,
Colleen had a great
Let,
conversation.
no, I was gonna say
And
somebody put a
Janice,
question.
Janice
Larry,
is
All the
well,
like,
guys are being really quiet here.
Somebody put a question for Marci in the chat.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that.
thank you.
A little bit about the co-generational work we're doing with the arts and nonprofit communities. Yeah, so we're working, so we do our work through cohorts. Like, we have these communities of practice for leaders of various kinds of programs, and then they can learn from each other. And so we're running right now one on youth civic leadership. So we're working with the civic leadership programs that work with high school and college students around civic engagement. And we are encouraging them to build into their programs, what would it be like if you involved older people in the civic lives, civic projects that these young people are working on. And most young people don't even think about older people when they're doing their civic work. They think about their peers and what is on the minds of their peers. And because of the influence of kind of introducing them to this concept, they're realizing, like, wow, older people have more time. They could be really helpful volunteers on my project. Like, they could be mentors. They have the resources and connections to get things done in my community. So we're trying to kind of influence the youth leadership space to think about ways to invite people of our age into the work of these young leaders, not just as mentors, but also as listeners, to hear what young people think are the issues of their day. So that's like one big body of work. We've worked with, in that loneliness and isolation work, we encountered quite a lot of arts projects, storytelling projects, music, intergenerational orchestra projects. So arts are a huge window into getting into cross-generational relationships. If you're involved in music, with younger people, like, again, like that is a great way for boundaries to fall away. Like you're just a guitar player or a piano player. You're not necessarily like a 60-year-old. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind.
That's fantastic. Well, one of the things we do is we try to stay on time and close right at 12:30. So, Marci, first of all, thank you so much for the last hour and a half. You've inspired me to do a few things. Be more curious, take a
Great.
class, and volunteer.
Great.
And so I think those are some really easy and clear things that will help build purpose and as well as through cogenerational experiences. So I really found this incredibly inspiring. So thank you so much. Colleen, is there anything else we want to cover?
We are good. And thank you, Tom, for your participation today as well. We really appreciated that work. And again, Marci, I think we are good to go. Everybody enjoy the April 1st and enjoy the rest of the week.
All right.
Hi, everyone.
Thanks again.
Thank you for having me.